welcome everyone here today to the Legal Wellbeing Network meeting. And I'm Heidi Alexander. I'm the director of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court Standing Committee on Lawyer Wellbeing, which I will talk just a bit more about. But it's really wonderful to see everyone here, so many dedicated professionals, everyone here committed to improving the well-being of those within our legal community. This platform really has served as a vital network for us to share ideas, to exchange resources, to learn from one another's experiences, all with the shared goal of fostering a healthier, more supportive environment for legal professionals. And I think importantly, these meetings have really helped us to establish community among people who are really passionate about well-being and are compassionate for others in the profession. And we all want to make this profession a better place. And so I think in a time where we see many attorneys very, very stressed and overwhelmed, I think this community is even more essential right now. And so we appreciate everyone being here to support one another. So whether you are local to Massachusetts or not, welcome. We have been running these meetings since 2020. And we try to hold them every other month, and we record our speaker, and so you can find all the past recordings on our website if you'd like to listen in. But you should be on our email list now, so you'll get notified for the next meeting. So just a quick reminder, or maybe new information for folks who haven't been here before. So these meetings are hosted by the Massachusetts Standing Committee on Lawyer Wellbeing, which is a permanent committee of the Supreme Judicial Court, which was established in 2020 as a result of the National Task Force Report on Lawyer Wellbeing published in 2017, and then under the late Chief Justice Gants, who had established a steering committee to look at specific issues in Massachusetts, as did many other states. We drafted and published a steering committee report in 2019 with a number of recommendations. And so those recommendations really guide our work on the standing committee. And so you can see, some of what we have been up to, and sort of what we focus on. The most important, really creating awareness of the importance of well-being in the profession, and we kind of see that as an umbrella term. There's lots of topics that come underneath that, and so there are a number of different programs and services and recommendations and proposals that we have worked towards. We work very closely with Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, and have worked to help Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers be more ubiquitous in the Commonwealth, and bar associations, law schools, and other workplaces. And so you can see here on this slide some of our different objectives. We, as folks probably know here, because most recently the SJC put out a call for appointments to our committee, because we do have terms, and we received a lot of applications. And so the justices reviewed those applications and chose some new folks to join our committee, and we're really excited. If you were not chosen, please know we want you involved, and there are many, many ways in which you can be involved. Again, there were so many applications, which I think, again, says something about this work and the awareness that we've created and the importance of the work. We now have our two co-chairs, Christina Turgeon out in the western part of the state, and Shalini George, who is a professor at Suffolk Law. And so, in a full committee, really rounding out all the different legal sectors, and we have a lot of diversity in many different ways on our committee. So we're pleased to have a very well-rounded committee. If you'd like to get a sense of some of the work that we've done in the past, we do have our annual reports. Our fourth annual report, which was published not so long ago, is up on our website, and so you can take a look at that. Just a couple of items that I wanted to call your attention to, specific projects and initiatives that you may not be aware of. One, which follows the Affinity Bar Town Hall report that we published in 2021, which highlighted lived experiences from lawyers who have been underrepresented in the legal community, marginalized, excluded, and the Affinity Bar associations recently published proposals that specifically focus on how to improve the well-being of lawyers from historically underrepresented, marginalized, and excluded in the legal profession, and to work on dismantling systemic inequalities. And so these are specific proposals, and so you can find them. There's a link from our website where there's a number of different programs that you'll see that will be coming up. CPCS is doing some programming, the Mass Bar is doing programming, the Boston Bar, and also Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. So I encourage you to take a look at these. In addition, and I thank folks here who have actually served as mentors in our mentorship program, but we do administer a statewide mentorship program, which is really geared towards new lawyers who are in transition, lawyers who are from historically underrepresented communities. And we have a program that just wrapped up, and we'll be starting a new program at the end of this month. And so we're always trying to get out the word to especially new lawyers who are seeking mentors, and we've had some really great success with this program. This is all available on our website. And then I also wanted to call your attention to Wellbeing Week in Law. So Wellbeing Week in Law, I think it's the fourth year. This is a week of really awareness around well-being in the profession. It was started by the National Task Force on Lawyer Wellbeing, now hosted by the Institute for Wellbeing in Law. We provide lots of different local events, the Mass Bar Association and their Wellbeing Committee, and the Boston Bar, and lots of the local bars and specialty bars and Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. We'll all be working together to provide a number of different programs. We also encourage you to think about programming in your own workplaces, and we're happy to help you brainstorm ideas around that. But again, a great way to really increase awareness during this week. And then I also wanted to call your attention to a number of the different offerings that Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers provides. Hopefully everyone here is aware of Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, which is our state lawyer assistance program, which provides free and confidential resources to attorneys, to law students, to judges, to folks who are ancillary to the legal profession. And this is just a sampling of some of the recent offerings at Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. Really great webinar on conflict within the courtroom. There's programs on legal technology, another program on addressing depression and suicide. And then in addition, Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers has actually been offering national mental health first aid training. So you can actually become certified in mental health first aid, which is a real skills-based course in identifying substance use and mental health conditions and what to do about them as a peer. And so this is a really great training. It's actually an all-day training that Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers is offering for a very nominal fee. So unfortunately, each time they put these out, there actually is a wait list, but they have been doing them on a quarterly basis. So if you're interested, definitely reach out to Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, and they'll let you know when they're running the next program. If you haven't been to our website, we do try to aggregate a number of resources on our website. And since I know folks here are really interested in this work, you can find a lot of the different reports and data and news items related to well-being in the profession, vicarious trauma, law student well-being, diversity in the profession. We have a lot of that information on our website. So if you're looking for something in particular, take a look there. All right. And then finally, our upcoming meetings. So our next meeting will be on April 8th, right before Wellbeing Week in Law. And then we'll have another meeting on June 10th. So that is the end of my administrative information, because I know you're all here to hear our speaker, our fantastic speaker. And I just want to introduce you to her. So Erica Harold is actually has a connection with Massachusetts. So she's a graduate of Harvard Law School, and she's actually on the faculty for Harvard Law's Trial Advocacy Workshop. And so she comes back every year and participates in that. She's currently the executive director of the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism that works on so many different initiatives focused on improving the legal system to administer more equitable, efficient, and effective justice. And so they do work around civility and diversity, the future of law, legal ethics, well-being. And so I was particularly interested because Erica helped work on a study entitled Bullying in the Legal Profession. And it's a study around lawyers' experiences and recommendations. And so, you know, we here in Massachusetts talk a lot about civility and the importance of civility. And I know folks have had experiences with bullying, especially in the courtroom, or bullying by other lawyers. And so I think this is a particularly relevant topic. And so invited Erica here to talk about her work with the commission, specifically the study and the recommendations for change. And I just wanted to mention before I turn things over to Erica, is I want to remind folks that we did do a study here in Massachusetts with the NORC out of the University of Chicago, a research team, and Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. If you haven't seen that data, I would recommend it. A study of lawyers and their well-being in Massachusetts. And we did actually ask some questions around bias, discrimination, harassment, not specifically bullying, but pretty close. And so I just wanted to provide just a snapshot of that data for you quickly. What we found in that study was that over a quarter of lawyers, 27%, who were surveyed, reported experiencing bias, harassment, or discrimination in the profession, and that almost 2/3, 60%, reported experiencing vicarious trauma from their legal work. So a lot of folks in the profession. So where they reported experiencing bias, harassment, and discrimination was primarily from attorneys representing other parties, so attorneys in the profession, or within their current place of employment or former place of employment, and also in the courts. So those were the highest. So, you know, we talk about civility, you know, among opposing counsel, you know, bias, discrimination, you know, it's happening here in Massachusetts. And then we know through this study is that there is a link between, there's this correlation between experiencing bias, harassment, and discrimination or vicarious trauma and its impact on well-being. And so you can see here, you know, of attorneys who experience bias, harassment, or discrimination, they had higher rates of burnout, higher rates of anxiety, higher rates of depression, and lower satisfaction with life. So we know it's problematic. And then finally, what I wanted to mention is that the study also looked at some of the demographics. So who's most impacted by bias, discrimination, and harassment, and vicarious trauma? Well, the greatest impact is on marginalized groups. So typically, groups who are female, who are not heterosexual, who identify as Asian, Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, and folks who identify as having a disability. So, you know, again, you know, something we really need to pay attention to. It's why we wanted to provide this research, and so we see that link. And so again, you know, this is happening in Massachusetts, and so that's why we invited Erica here to talk about her work with the commission. So Erica, I'm going to transition over to you now to talk about your work.
Thank you so much, Heidi. I really appreciate you inviting me. And I want to congratulate you and everything that MSJC and the Standing Committee on Lawyer Wellbeing has done, not just in Massachusetts, but nationally. One of the things that made me so honored to be able to present to you all today is that you all are leaders, and so much of what you do really has an impact nationally. And when I was talking to Heidi a little bit about this group, she talked about the quality of people who are part of this collective. And I'm particularly excited to be able to have a discussion afterwards because I'm very interested to hear your thoughts, your feedback, other things that you think might be interesting to study, because in many ways, I view what you do and your organization as being an incubator and an innovator within the legal profession. So there are three things that I'd like to focus on in today's presentation. First of all, the why we undertook this particular pilot in this particular program on bullying in the legal profession. I want to then highlight the data that the study uncovered, and then to focus on the recommendations that the report delineates for preventing bullying in the legal profession. But I first want to start with the why, because one of the things I've found is that people's stories and their motivations really are powerful animators for change. I've been involved in bullying prevention efforts for more than 20 years, and my why is both personal and professional. The catalyst for my involvement in preventing bullying really starts from my own experience being the victim of pervasive racial and sexual harassment when I was in high school. When I was in ninth grade, I was the victim of bullying, and it started out simply with name calling, teasing, taunting. I won't repeat the words, but any of you who had your own experiences in high school, you probably can imagine what some of those words were. It was a time when, instead of trying to find myself and find my way, I found myself trying to withdraw and almost become invisible because I didn't want to do anything that would attract people's attention to me. I remember there was a game that the students used to play called the Uncool game, where they would sit there with clipboards in class, and any gesture I made or anything that I would do, they would write it down. So if I coughed, if I answered a question either correctly or incorrectly, if I moved, they would write it down. And then at the end of the class period, the teacher would actually allow them to come to the front of the classroom and read aloud that list of all of the, quote, uncool things that I had done. You can only imagine how embarrassing and dehumanizing that experience felt. This harassment escalated all the way to death threats, and the administrators were unable to take the kind of action that would have made me feel safe. And I remember in talking to some of the administrators about this, I was told that I needed to learn how to separate the wheat from the chaff. And I was told that I needed to be very careful accusing anyone of harassment. I was told that 20, 30, 40 years from that point in time, those students would always have to live with the pain of what it felt like to be accused of harassing someone. I'm sure you can imagine what I was thinking in my head. 20, 30, 40 years from now, I will remember what it was like to go to high school and not to be viewed as important enough to fight for and to defend. So after this harassment and bullying persisted for more than a year, I ultimately made the decision to transfer to a different high school. And that was difficult because on some level, I felt like I was running away from the problem, but I knew I was in an environment where I wasn't safe and wasn't able to fully focus on the things that I needed to as a high school student. What I wrote, though, is I kept a diary during that time. And as I left the school, I wrote that if I ever had the ability to be able to make an impact on this issue of bullying, that I would take the opportunity to do so. So to sort of propel you forward in my life journey, that opportunity to make a difference on the issue of bullying came sort of unexpectedly when I was crowned Miss America 2003. There's a backstory for how my time in the pageants precipitated, and if you're interested in that, you can ask me about it during the Q&A. But the most important thing was that in being crowned Miss America, I suddenly found myself with an incredible platform to make a difference in the lives of young people and the topic of bullying. And so I focused on the issue of preventing youth violence and bullying during my year. And I put a couple of photos up there that highlight some of the initiatives that I focused on during that year. I spoke to more than 100,000 young people about combating peer-to-peer harassment. I collaborated with organizations like the National Center for Victims of Crime and Fight Crime, Invest in Kids to focus on the type of programs that would protect kids and make them feel safe. The card that you see up there with the 1-800 number was a hotline that we were able to set up both in English and Spanish to be able to provide young people with a resource that they could reach out to if they felt they were being targeted. And then the shot that you see of me standing with the crown pin, I partnered with PBS on their series In the Mix, and they produced an episode focused on preventing violence and bullying. And it was really an honor to be able to participate in that. But after becoming an attorney, one of the things that I was really disheartened to find was that so many of the bullying behaviors that I had told young people were unacceptable, like calling people names, insulting them, treating them in a negative and dehumanizing way, so many of those things that I told them were unacceptable seemed to actually be normalized within the legal profession. And that really disheartened me. And so there was another opportunity then to make a difference on this issue of bullying. And that came after I was appointed the executive director of the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism. In many ways, we focus on a lot of initiatives that your standing committee focuses on. And so I was really thrilled to have this opportunity to engage with you. Our mandate is to promote integrity, ethics, inclusion, well-being, and civility among Illinois lawyers and judges. And focusing on bullying in the legal profession is really at the intersection of those key values. And it also provides us with an opportunity to be able to talk about some of these core fundamental values of professionalism in a way that might be slightly different than lawyers are used to thinking about it. And so we undertook this initiative. It's believed to be one of the first wide-scale research projects in the US on this topic. And the survey was very specific with how we defined bullying. We defined it as inappropriate behavior intended to intimidate, humiliate, or control the actions of another person, including verbal, nonverbal, or physical acts. And we enlisted the Red Bee Group to undertake this research and conduct focus groups for us. We had more than 6,000 Illinois lawyers respond to the survey, which was a substantially larger number than we expected. And after we looked at that data, we then, with Red Bee Group's assistance, we had 10 focus groups that were conducted. And these focus groups were diverse with a range of participants as defined by race and ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, age and experience, disability, type of employment, and location of employment. And because Illinois is such a diverse state, and because we were able to have such a broad sample size, we felt that the results of our study were instructive not just for our state, but nationally. Before I share with you some of the data, I do want to briefly comment on what distinguishes bullying from incivility and bullying from harassment, because oftentimes those words are used interchangeably, but there are some very key distinctions that focus on intent, targeting, and whether someone has a protected characteristic. And this matters in terms of the policies that exist and some of the legal remedies that are available to people. So the main distinctions between incivility and bullying would really focus on intent, targeting, and frequency. While incivility may or may not be targeted at a specific person, bullying is abusive behavior that is targeted at a specific individual. Bullying is behavior that has an intent behind it, an intent to humiliate, control, or intimidate, whereas incivility may not always have a specific intent. Incivility may sometimes center on just generalized rudeness. Finally, acts of incivility may not be repeated over time. Sometimes it's just a one-off experience, whereas bullying is usually repeated over time. However, unchecked incivility can foster the type of conditions that lead to bullying and harassment, as behavior often operates on a continuum. The main distinction between bullying and harassment centers on protected characteristics. Harassment, in a nutshell, is bullying that's targeted at someone based on a protected characteristic, such as race, gender, religion, while bullying is not motivated by a protected characteristic or may not be able to be proven to be driven by a protected characteristic. And so what's most important to know about this distinction is that unlike harassment, bullying is not illegal. And so bullying is often not encompassed by anti-harassment policies. And so it leaves sort of a legal gap and a legal void. And this research was designed to underscore the importance of looking at those gaps that often occur in policies, because people may not be able to prove why they were targeted, but it doesn't somehow lessen the impact of it. So when we look at our data, what we found, and we focused just on a 1-year period of time. So we did not ask lawyers about the entire scope of their year or their profession. We wanted to know just on a very specific 1-year snapshot what their experience was like. And we found that 1 in 4 lawyers have experienced some form of bullying. And we included quotes because not only did we want data, but we wanted lawyers to have the ability to share the highlights of their experiences. And so you can see one person wrote that they were treated in a pathologically harsh manner. Another person wrote about the toxic workplace environment that was created by a person's bad behavior and the stress and anxiety and uncertainty that this caused. Like the survey results that Heidi shared earlier, and which I'm sure will not surprise you, our research found that bullying disproportionately impacts certain groups of lawyers. So with respect to gender, in a 1-year period alone, 38% of female lawyers were bullied at work compared to 15% of male lawyers. With respect to disability, 38% of lawyers with a disability were bullied in the past year, compared to 23% of lawyers without a disability. Looking at age, 39% of lawyers aged 25 to 35 were bullied in the past year. And lawyers in this age group were more likely to report that they had been bullied. The research also found that the likelihood of being bullied decreases for each increasingly older group of lawyers. And I think that's sort of intuitive. The more seniority someone accumulates, the more allies, the more power, also the more options and opportunities to leave an environment. People do have more power to be able to navigate their situation. With respect to sexual orientation, we found that 29% of gay or lesbian lawyers reported being bullied in the past year, as compared to 25% of heterosexual lawyers. I put up a few quotes that sort of illustrate some of the experiences that were shared with us in the survey. One of the things that was surprising and very powerful is the Redby Group, which administered the survey, talked about over 2,000 lawyers actually left comments in the survey part. And many times when people are taking surveys, as I'm sure you know, people just fill out the data and don't necessarily share comments. And they thought it was striking that so many people, when given the anonymity to share their experiences, wanted to share. As you can see, as it relates to disability, we have bullying and inability to respect ADA accommodations. I have a quote there about the fact that intimidating younger or newer lawyers is viewed as almost a legal tactic. And so the strategic incivility, the strategic bullying, that's particularly problematic because it undermines the notion that somehow people don't know what they're doing. In many cases, people know exactly what they're doing, and that's why they're choosing to do it. You also see the quote about sexual orientation and the names that female lawyers were called. And it's important because it's not just the data, it's these specific stories that matter. And you can maybe you see yourself in some of these experiences. We also found that lawyers of color were bullied more often than white lawyers. And so in a 1-year period, 36% of Middle Eastern, North African lawyers were bullied, 35% of Black lawyers were bullied, 34% of Hispanic lawyers were bullied, 32% of multiracial lawyers were bullied, 28% of Asian American lawyers were bullied, and 23% of white lawyers were bullied. One of the things that we've highlighted when we've been sharing this data is that it's really important to know that lawyers of color are disproportionately impacted, but it's also important to recognize that any person, regardless of their background, could find themselves targeted. And hopefully this creates a greater impetus for people to recognize that we all have a vested interest in ensuring that our legal profession is inclusive, because there's no one who's immune from experiencing this type of behavior. Here are a few quotes that showcase or illustrate that data. Someone wrote about being described in their employment evaluation as a, quote, angry Black man, which gets into some of the stereotypes and negative tropes that have been shared over time. Another person being told, you're very articulate, you have no accent, as if not having a, quote, accent is synonymous with being articulate. And then this quote illustrates the biases and the stereotypes, but then how that actually impacts someone's career and the struggle to advance and to have mentorship opportunities that are so essential when you're trying to become competitive and make your way in the legal profession. This next slide shows who is the bully. And very similar to the data, I see Heidi shaking her head because it's very similar to what you all found in your survey. 33% of the bullies were a lawyer that were outside of their firm or company, and this most often was an opposing counsel. 23% of the bullies were a lawyer in the firm that was more senior to them. Interestingly and disappointingly, 14% of the bullies were a judge. 8% were a high-level member of their firm or company. You see a client, and then you also see some bullying by people who are at the same level or who are junior to them. And this seems like it's very similar. And so sometimes you can see that power dynamics are at play, but the power dynamics aren't always the same, because your ability to navigate within your own firm versus in interactions with an opposing counsel, those are sometimes different experiences. And then the power you may or may not have in the courtroom when it's a judge, that also plays into it. And so I think, as you'll see when we share the recommendations, we tried to be sensitive to the fact that people's ability to navigate different scenarios really are predicated on the scenario and circumstances that they find themselves in. We also looked at what were the most commonly experienced types of bullying in the past year. 1, verbal intimidation, such as disrespectful speech, insults, name calling, shouting. 2, harsh, belittling, or excessive criticism of the person or their work. And I'm going to come back and discuss a few of these because you might be surprised that we included them within the definition of bullying. Demeaning nonverbal behavior such as eye rolling, finger pointing, staring. 4th, routinely being subject to unrealistic deadlines or unreasonable work demands. 5, behind the back false accusations or malicious rumors. someone improperly taking credit for your work, and then not receiving work-related information, such as not being included in important work meetings that you would otherwise expect to be included in. And when we discussed this definition, we recognized that some of these types of behaviors are easy behaviors to identify, and probably 100% of people would say that is bullying. But then when you look at certain types of behaviors, such as excessive criticism of someone in their work or unrealistic deadlines, we recognize that there might be some people who would push back on those and say, how is that encompassed within the definition of bullying? And the reason why we felt very strongly about including it is those are sometimes more subtle ways that people can be bullied in ways that are sometimes more difficult to report, because it's not just that you are being expected to produce excellent work. That's what we do as lawyers. But if you're being subject to a double standard where your work is being evaluated more harshly than someone else's work, or you're not being given information that you need in order to be able to perform the task asked of you, and that on some level you're being set up to fail. And it's difficult sometimes for newer attorneys, younger attorneys to recognize how those types of behaviors can be harmful and are working to their disadvantage. But I'm sure if we all think back upon our own careers or experiences of other people, you can see where these types of behaviors can be weaponized in a way that hold people to different standards, sabotage certain people, and prevent certain people from being able to advance within the profession. I will tell you that I found it refreshing that very few people have pushed back. I mean, as we were preparing to release this report, I'd put together a list of talking points if I was going to do interviews, and I had lots of talking points prepared to say why each of these behaviors are bullying. And one of the things that was surprising in releasing this report was that very few people actually pushed back and said, no, I think that's an appropriate thing to do. Because I think when you look at the totality of these things together, you see a spectrum. And you can quickly see how someone who's a newer attorney or someone who comes from a background that's historically underrepresented in the profession can find their career almost sabotaged a bit and pushed out of the profession in ways that they're not aware that how it happened or why it happened until it has happened. Which then I also wanted to note that other types of bullying behaviors that Illinois lawyers reported experiencing, and these were outliers, but it is important to note them. They reported experiencing cyberbullying, physical intimidation, such as throwing objects, invading space, and stalking, and physical contact, inappropriate touching, pushing, or shoving. And that gives a full picture of what Illinois lawyers experienced within a 1-year period. So what is the long-term impact of bullying on lawyers? 54% of lawyers reported a negative change in emotional well-being after being bullied. 39% of lawyers felt less productive at work. And 18% of lawyers reported that they left a job due to bullying. Now, that 18% was not focused just on a 1-year period. That was one question that was asked over the totality of their career. But I found it striking that 18% of lawyers said they actually left a job for this reason. I know most lawyers I know are quite risk averse. They do not take leaving a job practicing law lightly. And so when people wonder, is this a quantifiably bad problem? The fact that lawyers are willing to do all of the work required to leave a situation and find another, that sort of underscores it. I wanted to provide a little bit more insight on some of those negative effects because I think you'd find them particularly interesting given the focus of the standing committee. With the 54% who reported experiencing negative change in emotional well-being, they identified things like anxiety, loss of self-confidence, Importantly, 20% reported experiencing a decline in physical health. That does not surprise anyone here, I'm sure, because there's absolutely that connection between a negative mental health and well-being, and then finding that it manifests in a decline in physical health. And people having to change their jobs, change their practice departments, and loss of productivity. And we are happy to have this data. Obviously the data itself is heartbreaking in many ways, but what it does is underscore that this has a real impact upon the legal profession itself. Oftentimes we hear about making the business case for something. I think it's important to make the ethical case, the moral case, the professionalism case, but some people are only motivated by the business case. And so if you look at this data and the loss of productivity, the fact that people will change jobs because of this kind of behavior, if you are leading a law firm and you're trying to make sure that you're able to have strong retention efforts and that your client service is not being disrupted, this data shows you that if you want to be able to do that, you have to be able to focus on these issues. I see people are putting things in the chat. I want to quickly look and see if they are for me. Let's see. Will we get a link and a recording and the deck? I'm happy to provide all of those. And now we'll see, since I clicked on the chat, hopefully I can continue. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't something pressing that I was missing that I would think, oh, maybe nobody can see the slides. Let's see. I did want to highlight these quotes in particular because I think they illustrate the impact. Someone wrote, I'm on anti-anxiety medication and manage a tremendous amount of stress that is tied most directly to the negativity that seems so much more personal in litigation. Another person wrote very poignantly, bullying compounds itself. After being bullied, you begin to worry. Then you begin to have trouble sleeping. You come to work, but you aren't working at your full capacity. And then the quote that probably struck me the most, because we're kind of struck in different ways. And this quote was written by a woman of color. She wrote, bullying is a great silencer. When I read that, it instantly brought me back to that high school experience and wanting to shrink within myself and to be silent so that nobody would see who I was. It's a terrible way of living your life in high school, and it's a terrible way of being in a profession where you're supposed to advocate for other people and to make your presence known. We found that only 20% of bullying cases are reported to supervisors, firm leaders, or people within HR. And of those who did report, more than half of those said that their employer's response was not sufficient or it was totally unsatisfactory. Some common reasons for not reporting included not wanting to be perceived as, quote, weak or, quote, a complainer, fear of the bully's status, and the belief that the employer would not do anything, and also concerns about losing work or losing a job. So this brings us to some of the key recommendations that were set forth in the report. And this was based on lawyers' experiences, focus groups, and then some of what we know to be true about the workplace and what would be effective. The first is to implement anti-bullying policies in all workplaces where lawyers practice. And this is where that distinction comes in between bullying and harassment. Most workforces and workplaces have anti-harassment policies, but most of those policies are not going to include bullying because bullying is not the same as harassment. And so if someone finds themselves the victim of bullying within the workplace, but they can't prove that it's based on a protected characteristic, they may find themselves with no recourse or no remedy. We identified some of the elements that we think are really important to include within such a policy. One is clearly define what bullying is. detail concrete and remedial actions for engaging in bullying. And this could include reprimand, demotion, or termination. And it was important for us to list that we think that bullying should be a fireable offense because we don't think it's something that should be taken lightly. We also think it's important to have a very clear process for reporting the bullying and requiring an investigation of the allegations and documenting the results. The retaliation piece we thought was very key as well, because so many lawyers said that they were concerned about retaliation, and that's very understandable. And so one of the things that we think is important is that in the weeks following the investigation, someone should actually meet with the person maybe 2 weeks after, a couple months after, to find out whether retaliation is occurring. And the question should be asked in multiple ways. It's not enough to say, are you being retaliated against? It should be asking questions such as, tell me the different work assignments that you're working on right now. Tell me some of the different client pitches that you've been included in, because that's a way of finding out, is someone being deprived of work and deprived of opportunities because they reported being subject to bullying. We would also recommend that legal workplaces institute regular training that's customized for their particular policy, and do this on a regular basis so that people understand that not only how they should report, but how should they report, and that their employer thinks it's really important that they do report. Bystander training is also something that we think is really important, and the commission is working on some online educational modules to address that, because there are people who want to intervene but don't know the right way of doing it, and may intervene in a way that may actually exacerbate the situation. And so having bystander training where you talk about de-escalation, ensuring safety, and not taking away the power from the person who's being targeted, those are really key elements for training. We also recommend enforcing anti-bullying standards in courtrooms and litigation activities. One specific recommendation is that courts should adopt a standing order regarding bullying and incivility in legal proceedings. Judges should specifically delineate the types of behavior that are inappropriate as it relates to incivility and bullying, and make it clear how lawyers can bring that behavior to their attention, and then make it clear that judges would actually welcome receiving those sorts of reports. When we were identifying who are the power players within the legal profession that have the ability to help make this change, lawyers time and time again talked about the importance of judges setting the tone within their courtroom, because not only does that impact the courtroom, it has a ripple effect into depositions and all of the different aspects of legal proceedings, and then the profession itself. The commission is working on some judicial training for lawyers that's focused specifically on these recommendations. We piloted that last month, and we will continue to work on that. And it's been very encouraging to see how judges have embraced their role and their power to be able to address this. Another recommendation for bar associations to continue to use their resources to specifically highlight this issue, and to also try to create opportunities for people to share their experiences. Oftentimes, if a lawyer's, especially a younger lawyer, is being bullied, they may not feel comfortable talking about that experience within their own law firm. They may feel that they might be subject to retaliation. If bar associations can work to provide spaces and forums for people to bounce experiences and ideas off of other people who may not be part of their firm, then people are able to get the benefit of experience and some real practical advice of how to navigate a particular firm environment. When we were thinking about what kind of recommendations to give to individuals who are being targeted by bullying, we really spent a lot of time thinking about this. There are some people who would say you must report if you're being targeted by bullying, but we ultimately landed on individuals should take the actions that they think best protect their safety, their mental health, and their careers. There may be reasons why someone does not feel like it's safe to make a report. And I think that that is something that has to be honored and respected, because people have to first and foremost make sure that they are safe. And also, the burden of trying to disrupt the bullying that happens in the profession cannot be placed upon those with the least amount of power. It has to be placed upon those who have the power and who have the influence to actually make a difference. And so it is important that people, if they feel safe, report, but it's more important for those who are in positions of power to create environments where people don't have to experience behavior that they do report. And so this sort of, there's a quote that I'll share next that underscores that belief and that perspective. But we did want to show some quotes in terms of people want there to be tougher consequences for bullying. It should not just be disregarded as something that's normalized. One person wrote, "Bullying happens because it's allowed to happen." And I very much agree with that. One of the things that I found when I was promoting preventing youth violence and bullying as Miss America, because I was doing this in 2003, that was at a time when bullying programs were not a normalized part of most schools. And so the questions I got most when I was engaging with the media is, kids are going to be kids. You don't really think you're going to make a change as it relates to how schools view bullying. Well, fast forward 20 years from that point in time, every school has policies that address bullying. All states have legislation. Now, are they perfect? No, but there has been a cultural and paradigm shift in terms of what we think is just normalized behavior. I am not in any way saying I was responsible for that. There were many people who were advocating for bullying prevention programs in schools long before I became Miss America. But being Miss America enabled me to engage with those groups and to see that if you get what Malcolm Gladwell would talk about, a tipping point, you actually can change the culture. And so the same approach and mindset has to be put forth with respect to the legal profession. It only happens because we allow it to happen. Another person wrote, "Sometimes the bullies are big earners, so the other partners accept money in exchange for incivility. Eventually, it's a cancer and hurts the organization." Another person wrote, "It'll never stop if there aren't meaningful consequences for bad behavior." And then another person wrote, "Bullying should not be an expected rite of passage." And then this quote gets back to my perspective on who has the power to change. There are steps that individual lawyers can take when they are being bullied, but the ultimate responsibility for preventing bullying rests not on those who are bullied, but rather on those with the power to set and enforce policies in workplaces, courtrooms, and conference rooms across Illinois. This QR code will take you to a copy of the full report. We have the report and the executive summary, or you can access it by going to the website. And the final thing that I will leave you with before we open up for questions and discussions. I referenced earlier that when I was in high school, I kept a diary of my experiences. And the night before we released this report, we released it on October 1st because October is National Bullying Prevention Month. So the night before we released this report, I went back and I took out that diary that I kept when I was in high school and I read it. I read from the experiences, and then I read the entries that I wrote when I was leaving the school and promised that if I ever had an opportunity to make a difference on the issue of bullying, that I would take it. And I felt such a sense of personal fulfillment to be able to use something that was such a difficult time in my life as an impetus for change for other people. And I knew that the 13-year-old me would feel that it was all worth it. And so I thank each of you for what you do to be passionate, dedicated advocates for these types of values, because you're speaking for people who sometimes don't feel like they have a voice, and you're using your experiences in really powerful ways. And the tough things and challenges and obstacles that you've faced in your life, I would encourage you to lean into those things, because they are the experiences that often give you your greatest opportunity and platform to make a difference. And I'll turn it over to you, Heidi.
All right. Erica, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your story, your personal story, the work that you've done to make changes in many people's lives, and the work that you're continuing to do now, really focused on the legal profession and improving the profession. And so I think there's so much within this particular report that is relevant on national, international level, not just Illinois, and is just so timely. I really appreciate you being here and sharing this information. And I see that we do have a couple of questions in the chat, but after I do ask you those questions, I want to open it up to others to chime in. So I've just a couple of questions, but there was one regarding sort of the definition that you're using of bullying, and whether isolating the victim, not including them in conversations, whether that was included in the definition of bullying.
Absolutely. I appreciate that language there, because that absolutely would be bullying. Anytime you're isolating someone in ways where they are not included as part of the normal workforce, whether that's socially or professionally, you are creating an environment where someone is being bullied. I mean, if you think back to our experiences in lunchrooms, where you see someone sitting alone, that we all recognize that as bullying because it's so obvious. But in the workforce, isolating someone and ostracizing them, it's the same type of behavior that can make people feel unwelcome, and that their skill sets are not being embraced. So I would absolutely say that that's bullying.
Thank you. So I see another question in here regarding sample standing orders creating anti-bullying standards. And so I'm very interested in that. I'm also interested too in terms of, how I know this survey was the publication was very new, but I'm curious as to sort of how you're moving forward with this in Illinois, and whether you've seen any movement or work based on the report.
So I want to answer that in two ways. The first is, I had a great conversation with Heidi when we were preparing for this program, and I had said that I wanted to have a special conversation with you, Heidi, to talk about how you set the framework for implementing the recommendations from your report in 2019. So I'm going to shamelessly say that I will be following up to have such a meeting with you about that, because I think you've done an extraordinary job in being able to implement those action items. The things that we're working on right now, there are some judges that are already creating standing orders for their courtrooms. One of the nicest moments, right, this is probably the weekend after the report was released, I had a judge from Cook County just send me an email and say, I read the report, I love it, I want you to know I'm working on updating the language in my standing order for my courtroom this weekend. I know another judge is doing that as well. And so we are going to work to see if there's a way that we can be helpful in creating a standardized order. But if individual judges want to take the lead and craft language that they feel expresses it in their own language, we welcome that as well. We are working with several bar associations on potential policies and sample language for people. We thought about whether we should include draft policies in the report itself, but decided that we wanted to have a more collaborative effort on that, because a one-size-fits-all policy won't be effective, and we want a policy that people will actually implement. We're doing a lot of different webinars and trying to raise awareness of this issue, but we are really trying to think about how do we now codify these things. And so maybe in a year, you can invite me back and I can tell you how Heidi helped me to create a good framework for being able to put these into action. One of the things that we did is I do judicial training on the tools that judges have to navigate incivility and harassment. And so we updated that training to include this data on bullying and to help share with judges some of the distinctions and ways of engaging in the courtroom that would help. And so we did that training last month, and we are working on a larger scale version of that training. We also have a mentoring program, a lawyer-to-lawyer mentoring program, and it's a structured curricula that's focused on professionalism. And so we have updated that, and we'll be including specific sections on bullying, because being able to have a mentor and a mentee specifically talk about this issue it will be very powerful, because the mentor is well situated to be an ally and an advocate for the mentee, and the mentee is the one statistically that's most likely to be experiencing bullying in real time. And so having that kind of relationship and having the safety net of having someone who is supposed to talk to you to help make sure that you're acclimating well to the profession, we think will be really useful. So we're also working on an online educational module to help lawyers with the bystander issue, to kind of lay out the scope of the problem, but then also to give specific language for what do you say in a situation if you see someone that is being targeted. What do you say in real time? What are the follow-up steps? I think sometimes people want to jump in and do what they think they would want someone to do for them, but that can be very disempowering, and it can actually exacerbate the situation. And if it's not thought out, you can put someone in a situation where maybe they're not ready to leave the firm. Maybe they've decided they need a couple more months to figure out their best options, and you've taken that from them. So we're trying to work on very practical, almost talking points for people so that they feel empowered in those situations. So those are a few of the things that we're working on right now, but I really want more ideas of how we can embed this into the DNA of our profession, because I would love 20 years from now, someone to look back and say, oh my gosh, this is such a normalized thing. Every firm has anti-bullying programs. All courtrooms recognize that bullying is corrosive and undermines the values of the legal profession.
Thank you, Erica.